Welcome to the Media Careers Podcast, where we never fail to disappoint. And today we have with us our esteemed guest, Sally Johnson. Sally previously worked in the radio studio in BBC Coventry in Warwickshire, and now she is working in the newsrooms in London, which writes the news for channels 2, 3, 4 and 5. How are you today, Sally? Thank you so much for joining us.
Very well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful to hear. Thank you so much. Can you just start by kind of introducing yourself, to tell us a bit about yourself, and also talking about your role on a day-to-day basis?
Okay, so you did a pretty good introduction of me, actually. Got me down to a T. I currently work in the newsroom down in London. So for radios 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 music, we collate all of the news that comes into the broadcasting house where we work, and we write the news summaries that then go out on those radio stations. Essentially, a day of mine would be to come in, and it's always very different depending on what sort of day you're working. There's kind of 3 days that you work. There's a day when you work on a summary, which means that I would be writing the hourly news bulletins that you hear on the radio. There's a bulletins day, which is when I'm working specifically for Radio 4 and the longer news programs that they broadcast at 6 o'clock and at 1 o'clock and at midnight. I would be working with correspondents, people like Lise Gisette, who's currently over in Ukraine, and we would be working with correspondents in London as well to talk about the daily news and put together the audio. And I would say that's a more relaxed day. And a summary day, it feels like you're constantly working because you have the hourly deadline, whereas the bulletin day is slightly more relaxed because you have the big deadline at 6 o'clock. And then the final sort of a day that you work within this department is a night shift, which is what I'm going to be going on to later today, where you start at 10 p.m. and you work through until 9 a.m. the next morning. And that's a mix of things. But for me, that's the shift that I really enjoy, because that's the shift where I get to do news reading for those radio stations. So all through the night tonight, I'll be on radios 2 and 5 every hour, sometimes on the half hour. And that's essentially what it is I do down in London. It's called the Network Radio Newsroom.
Wow, that sounds really, really interesting. And I mean, those long hours must actually bring about like loads of different news stories all at once. Like, suddenly the world is unfolding and you get to report on that, which must feel really, really rewarding. Which kind of brings me on to my next main question, and it's quite a hard one to describe, I'm sure, but what inspires you to join this industry?
I always loved radio. Ever since I was little, you'd listen to it and it felt like I was listening to my friends. When I was at school, there was a girl called Lucy who every night we would listen to the same radio station, and one of us would phone in and send a message to the other person. And it was such a thrill to have my name read out on radio by this person I'd never met, who was broadcasting to Dudley, which is where I grew up. And it was always just something that I really wanted to do. I never really knew what I wanted to do in radio. I just knew I wanted to work in radio. So before I worked for the BBC, I was actually a press and PR person for arts organisations in Coventry. And taking people over to be interviewed, I just got really jealous, because I'd be in the radio station, I'd see all of this technology in the studios, and I'd still sit there and think, that's what I want to do. And so I asked to do work experience. I was 27 when I asked to do work experience at BBC Coventry in Warwickshire, which is quite old to do that sort of thing. But it was the best thing that I ever did, because it meant that I got to know all the right people. I learned on the job, which was just brilliant. And I love it, and it's great even to today. And there's so many different options that still in the future, not entirely sure what I want to do in radio, but I'm enjoying finding out.
Definitely. I mean, I can imagine like the thrill of radio, and it's very similar to, I suppose, the mediums that we grew up with, which is cinema and TV, and like the fascination behind those, and you know, having radio isn't one that we appreciate as much anymore, but it was one that's massively influential.
It's huge, and you saw that during the pandemic. So many people turned to listening to the radio because it was on radio. It's a brilliant medium because you can get information out really quickly. You don't have to wait for a certain deadline. You don't have to wait for pictures to be available. You can literally find something out, you verify it, and then it can be on air within 30 seconds. And there's nothing quite like that thrill of doing live radio when something either goes wrong or something huge happens, and you just get this huge rush of adrenaline, and it feels amazing to know that you're kind of at the heart of this developing story, and you're the person that's going to be telling other people about it, and it's a huge honor to be able to do that.
Wow, that sounds really, really amazing. And what's even more amazing is to hear about your passion about it. Like, it's really, really it's really been contagious, because just sitting here and listening to you in the radio room, I can kind of imagine the kind of experiences that you must go through, because it's a very, very similar setup, and it's just amazing to kind of hear about those kinds of experiences. And like, what is the best part about working in the newsroom up in London?
For me, the best part is news reading on Radio 2. So Radio 2 is the biggest radio station in Europe. And my favourite moment since I've been there was I was reading the news on a Sunday afternoon, and I just got a message from my friend who I hadn't seen in quite a while. I haven't spoken to her for a while, and she just messaged me to go, "I just heard you on Radio 2." And the thought that there's so many people listening to me, and I have that responsibility to give that or update them on really important news stories and stories that affect them. That's kind of the best thing for me is being live on air on Radio 2, because it's just a huge privilege.
Just out of curiosity, how many listeners do you get on average on Radio 2? It's just...
Oh, see, now I don't know, actually no, but it's we had our radar results recently, and a better journalist than I would probably know the answer to that, but it's tens of millions, I think, because it's kind of around 8 million maybe.
Wow, that's really fascinating, kind of having that power, having that that platform to talk about all of these really, really important issues, particularly politically as well. Like, it's almost really, really interesting, I'm sure.
It's interesting, but it's also a bit scary, because if you get something wrong, or you say the wrong word, then it can change the entire news story. And we're the BBC, and so you have this responsibility to be correct. All the information has to be up to date. And it's actually quite scary at times, knowing that so many people are waiting to listen to you or waking up to you. It's quite crazy when you think about it, really.
Yes, I mean, you're in people's lives kind of from the get-go, from the first, maybe it's the first instance when they wake up in the morning, or it's their commute to work, or whatever it may be, or it's the last thing at night. Like, people have let you into their lives. That's quite a big thing, I'm sure.
But that's why radio, I think, is so brilliant, in that it can be anywhere with you. So you can take your friends and your company wherever it is you're going. You can't read a newspaper whilst driving a car. You can't watch the TV whilst driving a car. Whereas radio, you have it everywhere, in the shower, on the train, anywhere you want it.
Yeah, definitely. And what would you say were the biggest challenges that either you currently face on a daily basis or that you have faced throughout your career, and how have you overcome these?
So on a daily basis, I think the biggest challenge is just making sure that your information is up to date. So especially at the moment when the conflict in Ukraine is it's just evolving every minute of every day. So you could write your summary. You start writing your summary maybe an hour and a half before it goes out. And you have to kind of make sure that by the time it does go out, it is as up to date as it can be. And sometimes that means that at 5 minutes to when it's meant to go, you have to make changes and you have to be telling the newsreader that something's changing. I'm going to have to cough, excuse me. Sorry about that. So that's kind of the biggest responsibility. I think in my career in general, the biggest challenge I've had is it's almost being taken seriously a little bit. I think I joined radio and I don't have a journalism degree. My degree is in radio production. So I don't have a journalism qualification. Everything I've learnt is I've learnt it as I've been doing the job. And I think sometimes not anymore because I've proven myself, but before I did that, I think I wasn't taken as seriously as other people and I wasn't given the opportunities that I wanted. So I had to fight a little bit harder to get them. I had to find avenues to kind of get to where I wanted to be. And I still feel that a little bit, that there's still kind of roadblocks in my path, but they're just challenges for me to overcome, like the other ones that I've done.
Yes, definitely. I mean, how do you feel you got the opportunity to prove yourself, or how do you feel that you had overcome that roadblock and that challenge?
You just take every single opportunity that you can. So even opportunities that you look at and go, well, I've never done that before, and I don't know if I can do that. I bet you can do it, and so give it a go. Because I feel that whatever situation you're in at the moment, it's not going to get worse. So take on-air presenting. It's quite a scary thing to sit in front of a desk with all the buttons, with all your microphones, and be in control of it. I think the position you start in is that you're not on air. And so if you do it, and you do it badly, you're in a position where you're still not on air. But if you do it well, then you can get better at it, and you get to have even more opportunities. So I think just throw yourself into whatever the challenge is and just enjoy it.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, going back to the point you mentioned about not having a degree in journalism and yet having this passion and going forward and taking the opportunities to do it anyway, if you could kind of go back in time, would you want to get that journalism degree, or do you think that's added to your resilience, the fact that you didn't have it and you worked hard and you got to where you wanted to be?
I wouldn't go back and get a journalism degree. I kind of feel like they're good to have, but a lot of the people that I know and a lot of the people that I work with you essentially just have to take your chance, ask for work experience, and do the best job that you can, which is what I did. And then I just kind of never left after I did my work experience. I kept badgering people. That's the best thing I think you can do, is just ask the right people all the questions that you want to ask. And if you're if you're doing work experience, or if you're at work in a radio studio or wherever it may be, and you're sat there thinking, well, I don't have much to do, go and ask somebody what to do, or go and find another story that you can go to somebody else and say, I have this story and I think this is something that we can work with. I think journalism degrees are brilliant, and they teach you a lot of the stuff before getting a job, but there is nothing that I think that can replace enthusiasm and curiosity for telling other people's stories and being able or feeling that pride that somebody trusts you with a story that they want to tell enough for you to put it on air. So curiosity and passion are the things I think people should have.
Well, I think that's so true, because I think people go into these films and sometimes they're not even passionate about it, or they're not really that interested in it. It's just a job to them. But for the people who have for the people who this is their dream, there's that drive and that passion that kind of can't be replaced, and it really shows in the work that's produced. And definitely, it's quite interesting and handy to know from our background as well, because our degree is very, very kind of general as opposed to being specific to one area. So yeah, I mean that's really amazing to hear. And now talking about kind of some stories and inside gossip, as we call it, from being on air. What is kind of the most memorable news story you've got to do?
The most memorable news story. So the thing that comes to mind isn't actually a news story. It's my most memorable moment on air. So on a Sunday, I'm going to have to cough again. I apologise.
No problem.
Sorry about that.
No problem at all.
On a Sunday, there used to be a programme called Golden Treasure. And the format of the show is that there was a presenter in the studio and a reporter who would be out and about. And there were 5 clues. The listeners would be given the first clue, and they have to solve the clue to give you a location where the reporter had to go to. It was my job as the reporter to go to these different locations, find the next clue, and then it would all repeat itself. My most memorable moment on air was I was at Stoneleigh Exhibition Centre because the listeners had said, oh, Sally needs to go there. She needs to, there'll be somebody waiting. They'd solved the clue, and that's the final destination. And it turned out that it wasn't the final destination. But the thing with this show is that you have to be quite loud and run around like a bit of a headless chicken asking people if they are expecting you. The thing is, when people aren't expecting you, they just think you're a bit weird. And so I'm running around trying to find somebody who might talk to me, and I turn around and there are security guards behind me, and on air I got escorted off the premises by the security people, all because they had no idea who I was, why I was meant to be there. And I'm just I'm trying to kind of present whilst also talking to these security people and trying to kind of calm the situation down. So that was quite a memorable thing. But as a news story, I think the most memorable stories are always the ones that affect real people. So we had a lot of people through the pandemic where we went into communities and we spoke to the people who needed something. If there was this big drive, we called it Make a Difference, where people could phone into the radio station and request help, because during the start of the pandemic, everybody was locked down, people were self-isolating, we didn't have vaccines, so it was a very scary period of time. And it meant some people couldn't go shopping, but occasionally those people didn't have the support that they needed, and so we helped them. And I remember there was this one guy, John in the Neaton, and he rallied around and just started collecting loads of food items. He would make food packages. He got other local businesses involved. So there was a woman who was making dessert. So every single week he had this roster of people, and he would go around and deliver this food parcel to this roster of people. And then local nurseries wanted to get involved, and so there were plants that would go out to people, or bunches of flowers, and it was all done out of this one guy's garage. and I was sent there to report. And when I arrived, he just opened up his garage door, and inside it was just chock-a-block of boxes, food, desserts, plants, and he was like servicing hundreds of people every single week, all just kind of not by himself, but he was the motivation behind it. And so I think as a journalist, for me, those are the most memorable stories, that where people, ordinary people, are kind of putting themselves out for others.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, there's so many people that rarely get recognition for what they do, and I think it's really amazing that through this kind of program, you got people receiving the recognition, and also you're being able to help them as well. Like, I think that's really, really incredible, and I think it's one of the ways that media can be used to make a massive difference into people's lives. And similarly, is there any guests that you've had either in the newsroom or in BBC Radio Coventry Warwick that like were really interesting to work with, or really funny, or just anything like that?
So met a lot of people, a lot of guests through my kind of, I was in local radio for 9 years. We don't tend to do guests down in London because we're just kind of taking other people's news and regurgitating it for a wider audience. But guest-wise at Coventry, Oh, I think I know. My favourite guest that I ever did, and this is completely personal because I'm such a huge Snow Patrol fan, the band. Their guitarist, Nathan Connolly, was also part of another band called Matador, and they played the Godiva Festival.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I was reporting on that Godiva Festival, and I got to interview him, and it was a dream come true. And now I can't tell you that it was special. It wasn't a special interview. It wasn't anything particularly big or exciting, but just because I love Snow Patrol so much, to be able to meet him and talk to him and find out kind of his inspirations, that was pretty special, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, meeting childhood heroes and people who we listen to, celebrities, even on like a smaller scale, is really, really incredible, and it's like one of those experiences that you can't quite forget.
Yeah, I think the one guest that I would mention was the Stratford MP, Nadine Zahawi, and the reason he was I had a lot of satisfaction being able to book him as a guest, because he had avoided the radio station. We hadn't spoken to him for about 8 months or so, and every time somebody put a bid in for him, it never quite happened. So I kind of became a bit of a dog with a bone, and I kept repeating bids to the same person and kind of putting forward the argument that he should be talking to his constituents and he should be talking to the local radio station that broadcast to Stratford. And so eventually he actually agreed to come on. So I was quite pleased with that one, because it felt just like I had achieved something, and it was a huge challenge in order to get him to come on and answer questions for a good 20 minutes.
Yeah, and definitely. And do you feel, this kind of question that I thought would be interesting to ask, but do you feel that radio news now has kind of less listeners due to the introduction of social media and the fact that we can get our news so instantly, or do you think that despite that, radio news still has a lot of loyal listeners and people who still tune in on a regular basis?
I think it's an interesting question. I think it's a mixture of both. So the good thing, as we've already discussed with radio, is that it can be anywhere. So it doesn't take effort. All you have to do is turn your radio on, and it's there. And a lot of people just stay listening, and they don't have to kind of seek out their news, because it just happens every hour. However, with kind of social media, I don't suppose people have to seek out news because it's at your fingertips. If you wake up, I don't know about you, but one of the first things I do when I wake up is to scroll through Twitter and find out what's going on. And so I do kind of get some of my news that way. But I don't think that I don't think social media will replace radio news. I think if somebody is looking to get an instant kind of breaking news, then social media is probably the way to go. But I also think that it's a bit of a scary prospect because you don't know that everything that you see on social media is to be believed or to be is true, whereas you know that if you're listening to a reputable radio station, you can trust what it is that they're saying. But I think it is definitely something that radio stations are aware of. We are looking to gain online audiences, so they've started doing Alexa bulletins that you can just recall whenever you want, and there's a bigger push to have a lot of the stories that they do on radio kind of mirrored onto our social media channels. So it is definitely something that we're aware of, but I think it's something that works alongside the radio station.
No, definitely. I think the fact that we now have apps where we can switch on the radio as compared to having a physical radio station and social media channels for these radio stations, it's all working hand in hand, and I don't think we'll ever truly come to a point where we don't need the radio anymore. Coming back to your song, though, last few questions I kind of had for you includes, what is your biggest achievement to date?
I'm going to sound like a broken record, but again, it's the reading the news for Radio 2. Growing up and listening to radio, and Radio 2 was such a huge influence, and the presenters that were on there, that was my biggest career highlight. That is it was on a bucket list a little while ago. I started writing one of these bucket lists of things to achieve before I was 40, and one of the things that was on there was to broadcast on Radio 2. And so being able to say that I've done that, and that I've read the news from Wogan House, which is where they broadcast from, is just, I'm so proud of myself to have worked so hard to be able to do that.
No, definitely. I mean, that really, really shows the fact that you achieved your dream, and you got to that place where you almost estimated your dream that you'd be. I think that's really, really amazing, especially for both myself as a student and for our listeners to pick up on. And what is your what's next? What's your next career aspiration? 5 to 10 years? Where do you expect to be?
I have absolutely no idea. I generally don't have a plan. I never have really had a plan. The thing with me is I take on a job, and whilst I'm doing that job and achieving it and kind of succeeding at it, I see what other people are doing, and I kind of look to see where is the next interesting, or where I might want to kind of hop along and have a go at a different job within the radio newsroom. So at CWR, I've been described as kind of the Swiss Army knife of workers, because you can kind of slot me into whatever role that they've got that they need somebody to fill in for, and I can do it because I just like finding out new things. So as soon as I've kind of achieved in one role, I'm looking for the next role. I never really know what that is. I don't have a hard and fast career path. It's just whatever I think is interesting at that time, and finding a way to go over there and have a go at it.
That sounds amazing. And yeah, I kind of agree. I mean, it's all well and good having a plan, but at the same time, plans often become rigid, and then human beings tend to be quite dissatisfied when we don't get exactly what we want, as compared to trying to just go with the flow and just seeing what comes up, because nature has its way of kind of finding finding opportunities for us ourselves.
I would really agree with that. I mean, when I first started in radio, I would never call myself a newsy person. I wanted to do the entertainment side. So the afternoon show was perfect for me because it was something that was light and fluffy, and you had celebrity guests on, and so it wasn't really a news program. And yet throughout my time in that radio station, I developed so much that I produced the breakfast show, which is a huge news-based, speech-based show. So there wasn't any music in there, and you had to just be able to roll with whatever was going to happen and fill your time without the kind of flexibility of being able to go, oh, we'll just play a song. You can't do that. And now I've developed so much as a person that I'm completely a newsy person. I understand what's going on in the world and I have an interest in it. And 10 years ago, I wouldn't even recognize me as a future person. I'd be like, no, that's not me. I won't end up like that.
No, definitely agree. I think we often, what we think we won't have an interest in, we often grow to love. It takes that time and that connection, and that's kind of what maturing is all about, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And lastly, just to wrap up, kind of, what would your advice be to someone wanting to go into the same industry as you?
So I repeat what I said earlier. Have a curiosity about people, have an openness about people, and always ask what's next. So if you get to the end of a job, don't just sit there and think, oh, I've done my job today. Go and find something else to do, or go and ask somebody if they need some help. Make yourself a bother to people so they notice you, and keep asking, how can I help? And can I come back? If you're doing work experience, it's my experience that if you do well in the 2 weeks that you're there, a lot of people start getting paid shifts, because if you prove yourself as somebody who is flexible and interested and who really wants to work, they want you to work for them, because there is nobody better to tell other people's stories than somebody who wants to tell other people's stories. So you have to kind of show that that's what you want to do.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's so true. I mean, especially for those of us going on to do work experience and or internships, like, the more you show that you're interested, the more you show that you want to work hard, the more likely you are to get that paid work and to start going up on that career ladder. And just before we wrap up, I thought we'd let you know that the room we are using for this interview today was opened by Jeremy Vine, and that is the name of the studio at Coventry University, and I believe he was a BBC Three presenter, so that's quite interesting that this studio is named after him. So
excellent.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. We've got to catch up some more, because I want to know a lot more than what we've just gone through. But that is kind of all from us, and it's been an honour, as always. Thank you so much for listening, and that's all for now.
Recording stopped.
That was great. Thank you so much. That was really good.
I'm so sorry for the coughing. My throat just went really